Ladies and gentlemen, this is Scott Pollock, Chief Editor of the Critical Post Chicago, reporting. Welcome to another edition of the Goldwater Report. Ladies and gentlemen, Thursday, March 4th, 2016, former Republican presidential nominee and candidate Mr. Mitt Romney gave a speech at the Hinckley Institute of Utah. As a preface to our treatise on the vote of no confidence and as a preface to our analysis of the current conditions for the Article 5 Convention of States being fomented by Mark Levin, the anchor desk of the Critical Post Chicago is here to offer every partisan in this country the following admonishment and outright denouncement of all of the punditry corps and the rest of these posturing peacocks. This interruption, by injecting into the national discussion a man of high polish and manicure though he may be, put on display for everyone in the country to witness, is on the face of it an impolitic arrogance which has been served to the good people of America for far too long. His rehearsed dictation in front of speech prompt monitors, turning from side to side like a robot, though well delivered, was a disingenuous speech, as disingenuous as any I've ever seen from this firmly entrenched, highly monetized, embedded organization as one of the political franchises which has helped to subvert for its entire existence, along with all their other counterparts, the principles for which this nation was founded. Those principles of liberty, free enterprise, and the protection of private property from unjust taxation without representation have long ago been abandoned, and instead what has been put in place is a tyrannical, bloated super bureaucracy of such devious art and design that at present its engines cannot be hindered or thwarted from moving forward. As I stated in our March 1st broadcast, and I'll repeat here, you, ladies and gentlemen, have been divided and conquered. Mr. Romney and his counsels floated the words of John Adams. His counsels, helping him with his speech, had the audacity to float the words of John F. Kennedy, a president whom was murdered in full view of the public and whose murder investigation was thwarted and lied about by the very engines of America's so-called security state, and also for which the press in this country, even after 1,000 books or more have been published, has not stayed vigilant to bring those men responsible in America's security state up for punishment and for the restoration for the rule of law. So, too, they had the audacity to cite Abraham Lincoln, another president murdered under dubious circumstances and compromised evidence. How dare these folks from their highly monetized positions in ivory towers, lecture the good people of America. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll remind you that in previous broadcast submissions by this anchor desk, I have asked the question, in light of the murder of John F. Kennedy, though he may have been an impolitic partisan, where is the press? I'm here to tell you, nowhere, save for the fact of this small, humble studio funded by my partner, Steve Arby, with operations in Tampa, as well as here, and myself. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to remind the people and to address directly this perfidious arrogance with the words of the only president who was not a member of any party, and whose words have been ignored since the day they were uttered. Apparently, the pundits in all sides of the propaganda press and the alternative fear pornography press can sit there and skim through the pages of history and cite all kinds of advice as if the platitudes were their own. But the most important advice everyone seems to have ignored. These excerpts are the words of President George Washington's farewell address to the nation, written in collaborative council with John Madison and later by Alexander Hamilton, 2 months before the election of 1796, at which time two political franchises had been formed and began to tear the country's natural, quote-unquote, natural aristocracy apart from its original mooring. At the time, there were two political franchises being formed, as I've just said. There were the so-called Federalists of Alexander Hamilton, who at the time were under the influence of European banking interests. And then there was the Republican Party of a more libertarian political bent of Thomas Jefferson, whom at the time was Washington's Secretary of State. Hamilton was the Secretary of his Treasury in that administration. These words are no less prescient now as they were when first published and spoken, and though the pundits often cite the founders in their literature, they too, along with all the other so-called liberals and conservatives, apparently choose to conveniently forget the warning from President Washington's final address to the nation. Quote, George Washington, from his farewell address to the nation, paragraphs 16 through 26. Be patient with this. Listen to this. Quote, to the efficacy and permanency of your union, a government for the whole is indispensable. No alliance, however strict between the parts, can be an adequate substitute. They must inevitably experience the infractions and interruptions which all alliances in all times have experienced. Sensible of this momentous truth, you have improved upon your first essay by the adoption of a constitution of government better calculated than your former for an intimate union and for the efficacious management of your common concerns. This government, the offspring of our own choice, uninfluenced and unawed, adopted upon full investigation and mature deliberation, completely free in its principles, in the distribution of its powers, uniting security with energy, and containing within itself a provision for its own amendment, has a just claim to your confidence and your support. Respect for its authority, compliance with its laws, acquiescence in its measures are duties enjoined by the fundamental maxims of true liberty. The basis of our political systems is the right of the people to make and to alter their constitution of government. But the constitution, which at any time exists, till changed by an explicit and authentic act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all. The very idea of the power and the right of the people to establish government presupposes the duty of every individual to obey the established government. All obstructions to the execution of the laws, all combinations and associations under whatever plausible character with the real design to direct, control, counteract, or awe the regular deliberation and action of the constituted authorities, are destructive of this fundamental principle and of fatal tendency. They serve to organize faction, to give it an artificial and extraordinary force, to put in the place of the delegated will of the nation the will of a party, often a small but artful and enterprising minority of the community, and according to the alternate triumphs of different parties, to make the public administration the mirror of the ill-concerted and incongruous projects of faction, rather than the organ of consistent and wholesome plans digested by common councils and modified by mutual interests. However, combinations or associations of the above description may now and then answer popular ends, they are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to such unjust dominion. Towards the preservation of your government and the permanency of your present happy state, it is requisite not only that you steadily discountenance irregular oppositions to its acknowledged authority, but also that you resist with care the spirit of innovation upon its principles, however specious the pretexts. One method of assault may be to effect, in the forms of the Constitution, alterations which will impair the energy of the system, and thus to undermine what cannot be directly overthrown. In all the changes to which you may be invited, remember that time and habit are at least as necessary to fix the true character of governments as of other human institutions. That experience is the surest standard by which to test the real tendency of the existing constitution of a country. That facility in changes upon the credit of mere hypothesis and opinion exposes to perpetual change from the endless variety of hypothesis and opinion. And remember especially that for the efficient management of our common interests in a country so extensive as ours, a government of as much vigor as is consistent with the perfect security of liberty is indispensable. Liberty itself will find in such a government, with powers properly distributed and adjusted, its surest guardian. It is, indeed, little else than a name, where the government is too feeble to withstand the enterprises of faction, to confine each member of the society within the limits prescribed by the laws, and to maintain all in the secure and tranquil enjoyment of the rights of person and property. I have already intimated to you the danger of parties in the state, with particular reference to the founding of them on geographical discriminations. Let me now take a more comprehensive view and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally. This spirit, unfortunately, is inseparable from our nature, having its roots in the strongest passions of the human mind. It exists under different shapes in all governments, more or less stifled, controlled, or repressed, but in those of the popular form it is seen in its greatest rankness and is truly their worst enemy. The alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to party discussion, which in different ages and countries has perpetrated the most horrid enormities, is itself a frightful despotism. That this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual. And sooner or later, the chief of some prevailing faction, more able or more fortunate than his competitors, turns this disposition to the purposes of his own elevation on the ruins of public liberty. Without looking forward to an extremity of this kind, which nevertheless ought not to be entirely out of sight, the common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it the interest and duty of a wise people to discourage and to restrain it. It serves always to distract the public councils and enfeeble the public administration. It agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms, kindles the animosity of one part against another, foments, occasionally, riot and insurrection. It opens the door to foreign influence and corruption, which find a facilitated access to the government itself through the channels of party passions. Thus, the policy and the will of one country are subjected to the policy and will of another. There is an opinion that parties in free countries are useful checks upon the administration of the government and serve to keep alive the spirit of liberty. This, within certain limits, is probably true. And in governments of a monarchical cast, patriotism may look with indulgence, if not with favor, upon the spirit of party. But in those of the popular character, in governments purely elective, it is a spirit not to be encouraged. From their natural tendency, it is certain there will always be enough of that spirit for every salutary purpose. And there being constant danger of excess, the effort ought to be, by force of public opinion, to mitigate and assuage it. A fire not to be quenched, it demands a uniform vigilance to prevent its bursting into a flame, lest, instead of warming, it should consume. It is important, likewise, that the habits of thinking in a free country should inspire caution in those entrusted with its administration to confine themselves within their respective constitutional spheres, avoiding, in the exercise of the powers of one department, to encroach upon another. This spirit of encroachment tends to consolidate the powers of all the departments in one, and thus to create, whatever the form of government, a real despotism. A just estimate of that love of power and proneness to abuse it which predominates in the human heart is sufficient to satisfy us of the truth of this position. The necessity of reciprocal checks in the exercise of political power, by dividing and distributing it into different depositories and constituting each the guardian of the public weal against invasion by the others, has been evinced by experiments ancient and modern, some of them in our own country and under our own eyes. To preserve them must be as necessary as to institute them, if, in the opinion of the people, The distribution or modification of the constitutional powers may be in any particular wrong. Let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates. But let there be no usurpation, for though this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. The precedent must always greatly overbalance in permanent evil any partial or transient benefit which the use can at any time yield. Unquote. George Washington. So, ladies and gentlemen, through the forces of habit long ago instituted, you have been delivered into the perfect paradigm of usurpacious control which the deceits of over 11 generations of Americans in factional opposition to each other have foisted onto the fabric and ill-conceived habits for which the people for all this time have fallen prey to, against the counsel of America's first and one of our most principled presidents, and who belonged to no party. The divide now rests between liberal European socialist despotism and so-called conservative philosophical thinking, unmoored from respect for the private property of the individual. There is no press organization in this country speaking to the original intent of what was being excised in our founding years, except this one. Again, this is Scott Pollack, Chief Editor of the Critical Post Chicago, reporting. Thanks again for watching another edition of the Goldwater Report. We'll be back very soon. That is all.